summer, when you had more zucchini than you ever knew what to do with, you could have grated some up, or hopefully you did grate some up and freeze it. And we're going to use this today in a chocolate zucchini cake, which is a real good combination for spring. It also is sort of a sneaky way to get a little bit of vegetable into dessert where you may not have normally found it. And that also bumps up the fiber, as well as makes the cake more nutritious part of the meal. It's still a cake though, remember, so you don't get to go hog wild. But it's a great way to incorporate some vegetables in a part of the meal you normally wouldn't see it. I have 3/4 of a cup of butter that's been brought to room temperature. You could use that or margarine. We're going to start that to cream just a little bit and get it softened up. And then gradually to that we're going to add 2 cups of sugar and let that cream and get nice and fluffy. So I've already started the butter just a little bit. Go ahead and add the 2 cups of sugar to that and then let that go on your mixer. Now while that is working, we'll bring that up a little bit higher in speed. I have 2½ cups of unsifted flour. Now, many times we ask you to sift things before you measure them. This time we don't want to do that, but when you're measuring flour, you do want to stir it well and then spoon it into your measuring cup and level it off. So we have 2½ cups of flour, and to that I'm going to add 1/2 cup of baking cocoa, 2½ teaspoons of baking powder, 1½ teaspoons of baking soda. Now this has both baking powder and baking soda because we're going to use zucchini, which has enough acid in it that we need something to react with. Also 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. Now since we didn't sift these together, what we're going to do is just use a regular whisk and stir them together so that you no longer see any of the flour separated from the cocoa, so they're nice and blended. Now, once those are taken care of, then you can come back over, double check and see how your sugar and butter are doing, and you want to cream those until they're really nice and fluffy. Once you get the butter and the sugar creamed well, you can start adding eggs. Now I recommend when you're cracking eggs that you crack them into a separate small bowl rather than to crack them into the big container. Part of that is because if you get a shell in the small bowl, you can get it back out. But also once in a while, not often, but once in a while you'll find an egg that just isn't good. It'll have a blood spot or actually be fertilized. And by doing it this way, you can make sure that you don't run into any problems with the eggs. Also to this, we're going to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla and 2 teaspoons of grated orange rind. And to do this one, I'm going to actually open it up here a little bit so you can get a better view, but also so that I can have a little bit better angle to get some of these other ingredients in. I've got 2 teaspoons of grated orange rind. And remember, when you do this, you just want to use the orange part of the rind, not the rest of it. And then your 2 cups of grated zucchini. When you're doing this, if you've had it in the freezer, which this time of year you probably will have, it's a good idea to make sure that it's completely thawed, and you may want to squeeze it a little bit because during the freezing process there's going to be some damage to the cells. You're going to have some of the liquid come out, and that is going to may make the batter a little bit too runny. So when you thaw it, squeeze it dry a little bit. It doesn't have to be completely dry like you often do with spinach, but get a little bit of that liquid out. And then blend these together. Mix them up well so that you get everything going together. Now we're going to use the flour mixture that we prepared, and we're going to add a cup of nuts to this. And one of the things that you might want to try when you're working with nuts is to take a little bit of the flour mixture. It doesn't have to be much, but stir that together with the nuts. And this will help you fight gravity later on, because the nuts are going to have a tendency to sink in the batter until the batter gets hot enough that the structure gets set. And when that structure sets, the nuts are going to be wherever they were. So if you can keep the nuts suspended by coating them with a little flour, that helps fight the gravity until the temperature sets, the structure sets, and the nuts are then blended throughout instead of sunk to one side or the other. And since this is going to go into a bundt cake or an angel food cake pan, and then you're going to invert it, all the nuts will be at the top if you don't do some sort of a little trick like this. All right, we're going to gradually stir in our flour mixture. In combination, we've got 1/2 cup of milk that we're also going to stir in here. So we're going to do it alternately. And we're just going to gradually mix these in. When that's folded in fairly well, mixed in fairly well, then you're going to add the milk and just do that in turns until they're both in. All right, once you get everything blended in, then you're ready to just fold in the nuts. Now make sure that the nuts are fairly well chopped into pieces. You can use pecans, you can use walnuts, you can be creative and use macadamia nuts or pistachios if you want. But make sure they're cut fairly finely down, otherwise, again, they're going to be difficult for you to work with later on when you're trying to cut the cake. They'll break apart, they're more apt to sink and so on. So it just makes the cake work a little bit better. Then you need a 10-inch pan. It can either be a bundt pan, it can be an angel food cake pan. And just put this in. You're going to spread it around in here. Make sure that the cake is buttered and floured before, or the cake pan is buttered and floured as you get started here. Have the oven preheated for 350 degrees. It's going to take about an hour to bake. And then you have a couple of options when it's done. Let it rest for about 15 minutes before you take it out of the pan and invert it onto a wire rack to cool completely. Then you can choose, you can either make a glaze to put over it. That adds a little bit more sweetness than you probably really need though. So if you're used to a person who often puts half an inch of frosting on top of a cake, you may try the glaze as a way to work yourself away from that much frosting and sweetness and sugar. Otherwise, if you're happy with the glaze, what you may simply want to do is what I've done with this one here. Smooth this off a little bit, and again, it's an hour at 350. Just put a little bit of powdered sugar on top of it. This is what it looks like when it's done. Again, it's a great way to have a dessert that also has a little bit more nutrition in it than some of the traditional cakes that we're used to. It's easy, it tastes good. Even the kids are going to like it, and I think you may be able to sneak that zucchini by them that you had a little bit of trouble getting rid of last summer when you had such an abundance. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.